All right, today is August 30th, 2019. My name is Jason Higgins. I'm in Arlington. I'm not in Arlington.
Alexandria.
I'm in Alexandria, Virginia today with Melissa Fitzgerald, the former director of Justice for Vets. And we're doing an interview for part of the Incarcerated Veterans Project. Melissa, I want to thank you for your willingness to share part of your story with me.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
you
I have your permission to record?
You do have my permission to record.
Wonderful, thank you. So let's just get started. Tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Who are your parents?
I'm from Philadelphia. I was born and raised there. Actually, I was born at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I went to an all-girls school, and my father he retired about a year and a half ago, was a judge. He was an assistant district attorney for most of my childhood and a judge for most of my adult years. And he actually was one of the people who launched the mental health court in Philadelphia many years ago, back when that was a very heavy lift. And so treatment courts have been in the background of my life for a long time. And my mother has been very involved in our community, and she was executive director of a nonprofit in Pennsylvania.
Wow, it sounds like you come from a family of people dedicated to these issues. Where does that sense of dedication come from?
I don't know. I can't. I think you mean specifically to that issue, to criminal justice reform. I mean, I think the school that I went to also was very service oriented. We had a service organization, and I remember I was president of that organization, and it was very fulfilling to be able to step outside of myself. And when I look back on my childhood, it was just part of what we did. It was like brushing your teeth. It wasn't special. It wasn't different. It was just what you did. You participated in the community, helped people who were in need, and watching my parents do that both professionally and personally, it certainly shaped me. You know, talking to my father about his life's work, he is dedicated to equity and to justice. And, you know, he said something to me when I first was starting at Justice for Vets at NADCP, and he said, you know, we have to decide when people get in trouble with the law, who are dealing with issues, are we going to take them into our hearts, or are we going to take them into our prisons? And that's a choice that we have to make. And, you know, in the land of the free, we incarcerate more of our people than any other nation in the world. And it doesn't have to be that way. And there is a better way. And I think I grew up seeing that there was a better way, and watching my father and his friends and my mother and just the community really fight for a better way, and a better way within the justice system. I remember my dad said when he first started at law school, one of his professors said to him, if you are interested in doing social work, the School of Social Work is across the street. And I look at my father's life's work, and it really is about helping people. It is about upholding justice. But what is justice? Is justice truly just if we aren't servicing and serving all of our people in the best way possible? I don't think so. And I think that treatment courts are an example of us doing it right, of us helping people in need, and as a result, serving the greater good of society as well. It is I think, unique, and I feel incredibly lucky to get to be a very small part of this treatment court movement.
Can you talk about that? How did you first become involved in the movement?
In many different ways. One, you know, sort of in the background of my life because of my dad. And then in 2011, I lost a friend to addiction. And Martin Sheen had been a champion of treatment courts from the early days. And he asked me if I would join him at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals National Conference here in Washington, D.C. in 2011. And I did, and I spoke at that, and I saw a lot of my parents' friends here because they are, part of the treatment court movement and part of NADCP, and it inspired me to become a supporter of NADCP and their work. And they had recently launched Justice for Vets, and I remember thinking that is such an incredible idea, and I really want to support that. At the same time, I was making a documentary. I was co-executive producing a documentary called Halfway Home that profiled several returning veterans who were struggling with the transition and dealing with PTS. Many of whom were self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. And, that really presenced for me the struggle that many of our veterans and their families are facing, and sort of the obligation that we all have to do more and do better by our veterans. So it was just it was interesting timing. And I remember the former CEO of NADCP, West Huddleston, had called me because I had been involved in NA supporting, and he said, this was 2013. At the end of the conversation, he said in a very offhanded way, we're looking for a new senior director of Justice for Vets, so if you know anybody. And I just reflexively said, if I were a veteran, I would throw my hat in the ring. And a couple days later, he called back and said, were you serious? And I remember it very vividly. I was sitting on my bed in Hollywood Hills, and I remember I said, yeah, I was serious. And I didn't have plans to come here to DC and move, but I'm so grateful that I was given the chance to do that. And I remember he said, well, when can you start? And this was in, I think it was October. And I said, how about January? That'll give me time to do a lot of research and get up to speed. And he said, how about Monday? And I said, well, how about January? And he said, how about Monday? So I started Monday. And it was interesting because I said, but before we really move forward, I want to talk to a couple of my friends who are veterans, because I'm not a veteran. And if they don't feel that I'm the right person to do this at this time, then I will help you find somebody who is. And so I called 3 of my very dear friends who are all veterans, Tommy Riemann, Patrick Murphy, and Max Cleland, and had a conversation with each of them about it. And they each had a different perspective. Patrick Murphy was the first Iraq War veteran to serve in Congress, and he later went on to be Undersecretary of the Army. But when I asked him if I was the right person to do this job, and he said yes. I said, but I'm not a veteran. He's like, well, I know you're not a veteran either. But he said, the civilian-military divide in this country has never been greater. And we need civilians and veterans to work together on behalf of our veterans if we are to really serve our veterans in the best way possible. And I believe that that is absolutely true. I think that we as civilians have an obligation to express our gratitude for the service of our veterans through our actions and through supporting programs that work for veterans and their families. And we use phrases like, we support our troops, we're a grateful nation, and we thank our veterans for their service. Those words must be backed up by actions. And I think as an actor, to act is to do. I know that we have to do that. And I'm very grateful for NADCP for giving me the opportunity to be part of Justice for Vets. It really has been the greatest honor of my life.
Sounds like a big transition from Hollywood moving back to DC.
Yeah.
After did you ever live in DC before?
Nope.
So you grew up in Philly, moved to Hollywood?
Moved to California, yep, to Los Angeles, yep.
And then DC. Okay, so big life transition. It seems pretty radical shift.
Very, very radical shift. And it's it's a lot of transition. It's moving across the country, changing completely, not just changing a job, but changing a career, and changing my friends. And I'm not married. I don't have children, so I moved here by myself. Luckily, I did have a few friends here, which made it a lot easier. But I think when you have a mission that's strong, you can do almost anything.
Can you talk about some of the lessons learned in the beginning?
I can. I would like to go back to, because I was saying I talked to three. Patrick Murphy was one, and talking about the civilian-military divide, because I do think it's unfair to ask our men and women who have already served and who are continuing to serve in every way to solve all the problems on their own. I think it is our responsibility as civilians to participate in that. And one of the other veterans that I called was Max Cleland, former senator from Georgia, and he definitely gave me the thumbs up to go ahead and do it, and was very supportive and helpful in many ways, as Patrick Murphy has been as well. And the other friend of mine I called was Tommy Riemann. Sergeant Tommy Riemann, was one of the people that we profiled in the film Halfway Home. And in 2003, when Tommy was in Iraq, his convoy came under heavy enemy fire. And Tommy used his body as a human shield. He was shot twice. He got 11 shrapnel wounds, and he refused to be carried off until all of his men were carried off. Tommy's a hero. In 2007, President Bush acknowledged Tommy at the State of the Union address, and Tommy was given like a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. There's an action figure after Tommy, a video game after Tommy. He was, received the Silver Star. And so amidst all the honors and accolades that Tommy was receiving, he was quietly suffering. He was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And, even after he shared his struggles in our film, he was still struggling. And after a night of heavy drinking and pills, he drove his truck into a tree, hoping to end his own life. And miraculously, he survived, but he was facing legal charges. And this was exactly at the moment that I was offered this job. So I do believe that there was something that was meant to be about it. Because when I talked to Tommy, he said, it's too late for me. There's no Veterans Treatment Court here in North Carolina, in Charlotte, where I live. And there were none in North Carolina at the time at all. And he said, it's too late for me, but it's not too late for other people. And do this job, and I'm going to help you. And Tommy was true to his word, and he helped me. But what was so incredible is that we screened Halfway Home, the film that Tommy's in, at the first ever Veterans Treatment Court conference, VetCourtCon, here in DC. Tommy was able to come for it. The director was able to come for it. And in the audience was the first court coordinator of the very first Veterans Treatment Court in North Carolina. He went up to Tommy and said, if we can get your charges transferred to, the Harnett County from Charlotte, would you be willing to drive the hour and a half each way to appear weekly in front of the judge and the interdisciplinary court team and participate in the Veterans Treatment Court program? And Tommy said yes. He never looked back. He went through that Veterans Treatment Court program, and about a year later, I was able to attend Tommy's graduation and watch him graduate. And he has just taken off and is living a wonderful life that he is proud of now. And I think about that a lot, because I think, if only for that, it was worth me doing this job.
Just to change one life.
To be a small part of it. I mean, he changed it. But yeah.
So once you assumed this new role and responsibility, what were some of the lessons you learned along the way?
Oh gosh, there are so many lessons that I learned along the way. And one of them is that, this sounds silly, but you never know anything. And to listen, which is a lesson I think I most of us, but I learned over and over again in my life in different ways. but to really listen and learn. And so when we announced that I was going to be the Senior Director of Justice for Vets at that first Veterans Treatment Court Conference of National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And I was announced to a room full of veterans and practitioners, people who work on behalf of veterans, people who were there for a training conference. And I remember being so nervous to get up and stand up in front of a room full of veterans, because there was a part of me that, I'm not a veteran. And I remember, there were certainly some that were not excited to have an actress from Hollywood come in and be head of Justice for Vets. And one of the veterans, who has since become a very close friend, he's a graduate of a Veterans Treatment Court program, he told me later, it's like, oh yeah, you had a bullseye on your back from the minute you stepped on that stage. And he said, we were gunning for you to fail. But he supported me still. When I asked for help, when I asked him to show up for things, he did. And, and he said recently, he's like, yeah, we were gunning for you to fail then. He goes, but I would take a bullet for you now. And I think working with people, listening to their stories, honoring what they need and their service was very helpful to me. And I came into this wanting to be of service. And I was given a lot of opportunities for that. And so many of the traveling around the country, going to veterans treatment courts, meeting veterans, meeting their families, seeing what they were struggling with, and seeing them triumph in these programs was miraculous to see that happen. And I thought I knew a lot about service. I have learned so much about service from the veterans that I've had the honor to work, on behalf of through Justice for Vets. They are continuing to be of service. In addition to their service to our country in the armed forces, they come back to our communities as civic assets, including the ones who are struggling. Once they get their lives back on track through these Veterans Treatment Court programs, they are so grateful for the second chance and committed to giving back that they continue to be of service for life. And watching Veterans Treatment Court graduates who then become mentors to their brothers and sisters in the courts is such a beautiful, beautiful circle.
Are there particular stories that you could tell?
So many stories that I could tell. Well, there's one story of the first, one of the first courts that I went to visit in my home state of Pennsylvania, one of the first veterans treatment courts. And I remember walking into that courtroom and feeling like this is not like any other courtroom I've been in. It was warm, it was conversational, people were asking about other people's, how are your children? And at the end of the session, the judge said, this is...
Judge Dugan?
No, Judge Ferber. This is, and I also went to Judge Dugan's court, and he's phenomenal too. I have lots of stories about Judge Dugan, but this particular judge, who has since retired, invited everyone back into his chambers for celebration, for party, basically. Everybody who was in the courtroom, because it was Veterans Day week. It wasn't Veterans Day, but it was that same week. And he said, I'd like to invite everybody back into my chambers for cake. And, there were chips and cake and soda. And I remember standing there and feeling like, this feels like a family friends party. This doesn't feel like a courtroom. You see the probation officer speaking with the participants saying, oh, how's your kid doing? How was that? I heard he had that big test. How'd that go? How's work going? It felt like a family. And everybody was supporting each other, knowing about each other's struggles and triumphs. And that was just, I had never seen anything like that in a courtroom setting. And I continued to go to and visit, I can't even tell you how many I visited across the country, but they're all like that. You feel the hope in the room. You feel the camaraderie in the room. You feel that everybody's there so that the participants can rise and be successful. and you see the potential and the humanity in each person. And I don't think that that is something that can be underestimated. I think when people believe in you, and then they also have programs and things you can participate in that are, skill building and treatment. I just think that combination has been proven to work.
Is there something you think could be taken from Veteran Treatment Court and applied to reform the criminal justice system itself?
Yes, I do. Can we get back to that question?
Sure.
Okay, so when I was at the party in the judge's chambers, a man walked up to me and he said, "Do you have a card?" And I had just started, so I didn't have a card yet. And I said, and I'd given him my personal old card. And so I gave it to him, and he said, "I want to help you." And he said, "Veterans Treatment Court saved my life. And I want to make sure that every veteran gets the same chance I got." And I want to tell you a little bit about him, and his name's Chuck. But before I do, I just want to say that has been replicated in almost every single veteran that I've met who's gone through a Veterans Treatment Court program. They are committed to serving, and they are committed to making sure that every single veteran in need has the same chance that they had. And when we have events, or when we need someone to come speak, or anything that we need, when we call one of the veterans, they're there. There is no questions asked. They show up and they say, whatever you need, whatever you need. And that's a lesson in service that I will never forget, and I'll always be grateful for. So this young man, Chuck, who asked for my card, his story is, well, he returned, he signed up to serve after 9/11. He returned from Iraq, and his missions were mostly at night, and he said night times were the hardest. He's like, I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming. I couldn't be in a room with my back always had to be up against a wall. He said, I had horrible nightmares. I got fired from my job. I got kicked out of my house. I couldn't even get into bed without 20 beers in me. And he said it was post-traumatic stress disorder, but he didn't know that at the time. And he said, one night I walked into a bar and I woke up and I was behind bars. And he was given the chance to participate in a Veterans Treatment Court program. And it saved his life. He got the combination of accountability and support and a mentor. And he said, the judge, he's like, I was in the military. The judge is, I like a structure. And they gave me that structure. And he said, but the judge is an authority figure, which he said I'm also used to. And he said, but he's also somebody who cares about me. And when he recommended that I do something, I did it. And he participated in a treatment program, obviously in meetings, he went to the VA for different treatments. And he said, when the judge said to me, I think you should take a ceramics class, it will help with your, PTSD. And he said, he's tattooed very, he said, Melissa, do I look the kind of guy who would take ceramics? And to me, I was like, well, I think anyone takes ceramics, but and he said, no, but Judge Ferger asked me to take ceramics. So I took ceramics. And you know what? He said, it helped. And then he pointed to an eagle that was sitting up on the bench, on the bench in the courtroom. And he said, I made that because that eagle represents freedom, including mine. Chuck's younger cousin, who really was they were raised together, so they were like brothers, followed him to Iraq. And he returned home in a very similar situation, and he was struggling and self-medicating, and he died. And while Chuck was in the Veterans Treatment Court program, and Chuck said, if I hadn't had the skills and the support and my mentor and the community that I had in Veterans Treatment Court, I would have followed my cousin to the grave. He said, but I did have those skills and those tools that I had gotten, and I had a mentor that I could talk to who was a Vietnam era veteran, and he could understand me, and I could be open with him. And he said, I used to tease him that he was not even a father figure, but more like a grandfather figure. And when Chuck completed the program, he had the opportunity to come and speak at our Veterans Treatment Court conference, and it was really wonderful to sit in the audience and watch him share his story, because he was sharing his story to help other people, and he continues to be of service.
Can the job become difficult for you, hearing some of these stories all the time? The ones that aren't as positive.
Well, by the time the veterans are in the Veterans Treatment Court program, that's where I feel like there's so much hope.
Sure.
You know, they're getting the opportunity to fight for their own freedom. They're getting the treatment that they've earned and deserve and need. They are getting the support system that they have earned, deserve, and need. And they are getting wraparound services. Treatment courts are, I'm sure you've heard this already, but a one-stop shop for veterans. So you've got a whole community of people that are dedicated to the success of this veteran. People who want them to succeed. So I feel like in the job, there's so much hope.
Right.
And so many of the people that we meet are on the path to recovery, or they have graduated from the program and they are helping to give back, and they want to find ways to give back. So they reach out to us and they say, if you need anything, whatever you need, if you need me to speak and share my story, I want to help other people. I want to, make sure that every veteran gets the same chance I got. And that's inspiring. And then meeting the families children who are getting their parents back, parents who are getting their children back, nieces and nephews who are getting their aunts and uncles back, and neighbors that are getting a great neighbor back, and a community member, and a teacher back, and a soccer coach back. That's inspiring and motivating. And, there were times when I first started, I had such a huge learning curve. I was often here till 10, 11 at night, pretty regularly actually. And at night was when my phone would ring. And it would often be calls from family members of veterans who were really struggling. And they had found our phone number, online. And oftentimes it was from family members of veterans that wouldn't qualify for Veterans Treatment Court program. One of them was, I remember this one woman called, and a lovely, lovely woman, and her daughter had married her high school sweetheart. So she had known him his whole life. And she said, my daughter married this wonderful young man. We loved him. We love him still. And he went off to war after 9/11, came back, struggling, post-traumatic stress disorder, ended up accidentally, but because of his PTSD, ended up accidentally shooting and killing his wife's grandmother, this woman's mother. And this woman was calling to see if she could get help for her daughter's husband, who had killed her mother. And she said, he is a good boy. She said, this is something that happened to him, and he didn't mean to do it. And she was in a lot of pain, and the whole family was in a lot of pain. And there was nothing I could do to help. I mean, he's not going to qualify for Veterans Treatment Court program, but I think she just wanted someone to listen and hear what was happening to her and her family. And because after I'd let her know that, there's nothing that I can do on this end in terms of, nobody will qualify for a treatment court program who has done serious bodily injury to another person, that, public safety is still, it is the most important thing. And those kinds of calls, although incredibly sad and depressing were also very motivating and continue to be motivating, because those are the reasons that we're doing what we're doing here. And they're the reasons why people are working in veterans treatment courts all across the country. And that's the other thing that was a really big motivator is meeting the men and women who work in these courts, in all treatment courts, veterans treatment courts and other treatment courts. But, and I remember a judge said to me, and so many have said, working in a treatment court, working in a veterans treatment court has been the highlight of my career in criminal justice, because people are getting better. Like before, when someone would return to my courtroom, it was because they had been rearrested. And now when they come into my courtroom, when they come back into my courtroom, it's to introduce me to their children, or invite me to their wedding, or their graduation, or tell me about their new job. And I think you can't underestimate the power of that. And seeing the difference between not having a treatment court and having a treatment court.
So can you talk about your job? What did it actually involve? Like, what did your days look like?
When I first started at Justice for Vets, my days were very, very long and very varied. Sometimes I would be at my desk, writing, reading, and doing things for Justice for Vets, office work. Sometimes I would be on the road giving a speech or attending a veterans treatment court graduation, which is a favorite part of my job. And sometimes it would be going to observe in a courtroom. Many times it would be out promoting the work that we do out in the world, to create partnerships with organizations, with businesses, with community leaders, and and doing media, because we need to ensure that veterans treatment courts and their importance stay in the public eye. There are tens of thousands of veterans organizations, and I think there is fatigue, and we need to make sure that we're staying out there, that we are putting the stories of the men and women who graduate from these treatment court programs in the media, keeping them in the public eye. And to that end, having been an actor, and a lot of my friends are still actors, they've been immensely helpful and generous with their time and their talents on behalf of veterans treatment courts. So we've made several videos with the cast of The West Wing, and the first one was for Justice for Vets and veterans treatment courts, and we made several versions of it. A 30-second that has been on television as a PSA. Comcast gave us many millions of dollars worth of airtime to promote veterans treatment courts, and then sort of a 3-minute version that educates people about what is a veterans treatment court. And then we worked with participant media. They made several. They made an animated video of what is a veterans treatment court for us, and another video, and putting those out in the world so that people know that these exist. So many of my friends and didn't know about veterans treatment courts because they just started in 2008. But when I told them about treatment courts and veterans treatment courts, they're like, "Wow, that is such an incredible idea and completely makes sense. We should be doing that for everybody." I'm like, "We are, and we have been. We just have to make sure we keep telling that story and keep it out there." And I have not encountered people who are not supportive of veterans treatment courts. Once you learn about them, you're for them. And my dad said something to me before I came for the very first treatment court conference in 2011. I said, "Well, Dad, tell me, what do you really think about treatment courts?" And he said, "Anybody who knows anything about treatment courts is for them, and they're for them because they work." And when you think about it, they work in every bucket that you could possibly have. They work at making our communities safer by reducing crime. They work by saving a ton of taxpayer dollars. They work by reuniting families, and they work by honoring the service of our veterans in a real and tangible way. I feel like a big part of my job was to, and is, to share the stories of the veterans and their families who go through our veterans treatment court programs, and to make sure that the public still cares. Because there are so many people who are still struggling. And there's a need for these courts, and there's a need for a lot more of these courts across the country. I think as a nation, if we say that we honor the service of our veterans and we support the troops, we need to have a veterans treatment court within reach of every veteran in need. And I think telling the stories, people do care because they see it.
Do you think that, I know you're friends with a lot of veterans and that you've worked with a lot of veterans, in your experience with them, do you think that veterans, whenever they talk about their traumatic experiences or relate to another veteran who may have had a similar shared traumatic experience in the military, do you think it helps them to talk?
Like, I can talk about the mentor program for sure.
Yeah,
so
like mentors,
yes.
example, yeah.
So veterans from the community volunteer to serve as mentors to their brothers and sisters who are going through the treatment court programs. And what I've heard from the veterans who have mentors and from the mentors themselves, they say, you know, veteran to veteran, I can tell them it's someone who's been through what I've been through. It's someone who will understand what I'm going through. And, you know, actually, Chuck is the one who said this. He said, in the courtroom, I got my unit back because it's an all-veteran docket and veteran to veteran. And I went to another court in Seattle, and I remember the judge saying something to one of the participants who was in the final phase of the Veterans Treatment Court program, which meant he didn't have to come every week. He only had to come every few weeks because he was in the final phase. And the judge said, you know, I have to ask you a question. You're in the final phase. You don't have to be here today. You didn't have to be here last week. And yet, you were here last week, and you're here today. And you're here every week. Why? And he said, I want every single veteran who's participating in this program to feel that I got their back. I'm here to support them. I'm here to encourage them. I'm here to show them that it can be done. And that to me says it all. They support each other fiercely. And, you know, so many of them have said to me, I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing this for my brothers and sisters.
Do you think that there's something unique about the Vietnam generation and their involvement in the courts?
Well, I can only tell you my experience. I certainly don't want to speak for other people, but my experience is, and what I've heard from many of the Vietnam era veterans who are volunteering, is that we don't want to see another generation suffer the way we did. Another generation of veterans suffer the way we did. And there was when we first started, we were doing a veteran mentor training in in Tennessee. It was in Tennessee, and as a statewide training. And you know, I wasn't doing the training, but I was there, and several veterans were who actually, one of the veterans who started the mentor program in Buffalo, New York, he got up and said, you know, for all the Vietnam era veterans who are here today, I want to say something that we didn't hear. Welcome home. And that was incredibly profound, and many of the volunteer veterans in that room were Vietnam era veterans, and it was just a profound moment. And I think he does that at every training.
Are you talking about Jack?
Yeah, incredible man.
Yeah, he's a really great guy.
Yeah, incredible. I love him. I love him. Yeah, and that's been a huge gift, is getting to meet such remarkable, inspirational people and learn so much from them. I think that pretty much everybody supports veterans treatment courts on both sides of the aisle. I mean,
right.
You know, Michelle Obama certainly did have the Joining Forces initiative, which was phenomenal. But I would say that this issue, veterans treatment courts and treatment courts in general, are completely bipartisan. We've had support from both sides of the aisle because they work.
Right.
I think it's hard to argue with success, and it is hard to argue with providing the men and women who put their lives on the line for this country, providing them with what they deserve when they come home. I think it's hard to fight that, especially if that also reduces crime in the community, saves taxpayer dollars, and reunites families. No, I feel like this is one of the few issues that is not partisan at all. And I will also say what a joy it has been to work on an issue that is not partisan, to work with people on both sides of the aisle on behalf of others. And I'm very lucky, and we're all lucky to get to do that. And we've met some incredible supporters on both sides of the aisle.
Sure. Has this administration been as supportive as the previous one? I know that Justice for Vets was launched under the Obama administration,
Yeah.
so I'm curious about the transition.
I mean, that's not really my area of expertise, is
Sure.
not the political piece of it, but we enjoy and have enjoyed the support of the administrations throughout.
I was
Yeah.
just curious about that. I haven't,
Yeah, I mean, there are probably other people who can answer that better, but actually probably not. We've had great support from Congress, from the White House, right, left, all because they're working. These courts are working.
it's very heartening, actually,
Yeah.
to see people working together to solve a really pervasive social issue.
Oh, it's so heartening. It is very heartening. And I think the lessons learned from treatment courts, the principles of treatment courts, can and should be applied throughout the justice system, but also watching how people, communities have worked together from the local, state, and federal level to create something that works for our community and for our country. I think there are a lot of lessons there.
Do you think that people are exceptionally maybe more likely to help veterans, or that there's something about trying to help veterans causes makes people more likely to reconsider the criminal justice system as a whole?
I think that our nation is grateful for the service of our veterans. And I think that we are always looking for ways to express that gratitude. And it's not, I think a lot of civilians don't know how to do it, don't know how they can help and how they can support. And veterans treatment courts, once they learn about them, is a way that they can support. And I think it's easier to understand, like, oh, I get that. They've returned home. They're struggling with the transition. And then when you think about that, they've perhaps dealt with trauma, and as a result, have a substance use disorder and get in trouble with the law because of that. That is intuitive, and I think I've certainly found that it is, it's something people understand, but treatment courts in general, people seem to understand when you talk about them and explain them. And so I'm not really answering your question that well. I do think so. I think that certainly the people that I've talked to have very open hearts and open minds when you are talking about serving veterans.
That's a great answer. Do you think that there is a relationship between trauma and incarceration?
I am not an expert, so, but I will say that I have talked to quite a few, and one judge put it very succinctly. He said, I don't think that I have had in my treatment court or in my other court dockets in my career people who've come in without some sort of trauma. And I think that's also something that I learned from veterans treatment courts. Veterans have really led the way on many issues and have taught us a lot in a lot of different areas. And I think this is one of those areas. I think that people understand trauma from war, understand the concept, don't understand it, but understand the concept of experiencing trauma from war. And I think that then makes it easier to understand trauma, childhood trauma. So many people are dealing with trauma, and I think that if we can take those principles and those lessons learned and apply them throughout the justice system, I think we can transform, certainly we can transform the way this nation operates our criminal justice system. We can transform our relationship to justice, and we can make sure, and we can ensure that justice is truly just. And I think you can't do that if you don't understand where people are coming from. You must understand where people are coming from. And that's one of the basic things of a treatment court, is that you treat people as an individual. You see their potential, you see their humanity, and you work together as a team to support them and lift them up to be the best that they can be, and return to their community as a contributing member, as a parent, as a child, as a neighbor, as an asset to that community.
I believe you. I think that's what this project is really about too, is showing that there is solutions to mass incarceration.
Well, I think treatment courts is part of, treatment courts are part of a larger solution to mass incarceration. And I think that we are at an exciting moment in terms of criminal justice reform, because I think the public has never had more of an interest or understanding of our criminal justice system. And I think, a lot of people understand that we have mass incarceration in this country, and that it's wrong, and it doesn't have to be that way, that there are solutions. And it's exciting to be able to participate in one of those solutions, and then also to help share that with the country.
So as a historian, I'm going to regret not asking some of these chronological type of questions. Are there key moments, watershed moments in the history of the organization under your directorship that you would like to mention?
Yes, there are a couple things. First of all, I think when I started, which was 2013, there were about 90 veterans treatment courts across the country. There are now over 400, well over 400, and there are hundreds more in different stages of planning and implementation. And I think that speaks to an understanding across the country that we have a need to serve our veterans, that treatment courts work, that veterans treatment courts work, and support for them. So I'd say that the growth of them, the rapid expansion, has been exciting to watch. We implemented a training program for volunteer veteran mentors, and we do that all across the country now. I think that's important and exciting. And we now actually have an online training, because we can't keep up with the demand. Of course, in-person training is the most valuable and wonderful. If we can't reach every single volunteer veteran mentor, which we can't in person, then having an online training is important. It's also important for ongoing training. So we launched that as well.
Can you talk about the training? Like, how does it work? You have Jack O'Connor, a couple of other...
Well, that's for the volunteer veteran mentor training, and we have a curriculum now, and we have faculty, and they train across the country, and it's 2 days of training. And that's, I'm not a trainer. I don't have the background to do that, and but I have been to multiple trainings, and I have fought for the funding for the online, because I believe in these trainings. I think they're very valuable, and I'm a mentor. I started a mentoring program in 1995 in Los Angeles, and we certainly had a mentor training, in that.
What field? You're a mentor in?
Oh, I have several mentees from Voices in Harmony, which is the organization I started back in 1995.
Okay.
So we worked with at-risk teens on a mentoring theater program.
Okay. So this advocacy work, you've been doing this for a long time then.
Yeah. And what's interesting is one of my, I guess she's a former mentee because she's now in her 30s, but she was in our program when she was 16. she comes and works at the conference for NADCP, and she loves what we're doing, and it's really exciting. It's been several years that she's been working at the conference. It's an incredible experience because we had 6,000 people there at our conference, and just being in a room at the opening and closing ceremony with 6,000 people who believe that there's a better way, and they are willing to fight for it, and they are willing to work day in and day out to make sure that people get the treatment and the mentoring and the services that they need to come back into the community as contributing members. I mean, that's inspiring. And I can't say enough about it because I've had friends come. I've had actor friends come to speak, and it's awe-inspiring to stand up in front of and or just look from the side at this room full of people who believe in something bigger than themselves, and they're willing to fight for it. So I hope you can come next year.
I hope so as well. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about in this interview that I haven't thought to ask, or something you wanted to
Let me
go back
see.
to?
Let me just see if there is.
Yeah.
I guess there are just a couple more stories that I'd like to share.
I love stories. Tell them all.
Tim Wynn, who you've met. I was invited by Judge Dugan. Actually, let me step back. One of the first courts I went to were in my hometown because I had, I could stay at my parents' house, and I knew some of the judges, and I could do a bunch of courts at once. So I went to Judge Dugan's court in Philadelphia, and that was, he's wonderful. The court was great. The participants were incredible. Some had family members sitting out where I was sitting, and then I was invited to come back to a graduation, which I did, and I watched Tim Wynn graduate. And I got to know Tim, and at the time, the court coordinator, I was saying, we're looking for someone to share their story at our conference. He said, well, you remember Tim Wynn? I'm like, yeah, I do. He said he'd be good. And so, I connected with Tim, and I've gotten to know Tim, know his family over the years, and watching him just soar is incredible. He's an incredible man. And talk about tireless service for life. Not just him, his wife, his kids. They do so much for the veteran community. Every single day he's doing something. Every single day. And working back in the court, and going out and sharing his story to help people. He's one of the veterans I'd said, he never says no. Where do you need me? Where and when do you need me? And it was really exciting this year because he, his record was not fully expunged from the Veterans Treatment Court. They did what they could do, but there was one charge that had to be, I think the governor had to sign off on. So he went through the process, and he asked me to go and speak on his behalf in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to the Board of Pardons. And that was, I'd never done that before. So I went with Tim and with his family, and he had several people speak on his behalf. And I was honored and proud to do that, and to say that I believe in this man like nobody's business, and I've had years of experience of working with him. And then to see him be so honest and answer really tough personal questions about his process, and to be so introspective. I thought there's no way he's not going to pass this Board of Pardons. And he passed unanimously, and then his case went on to the desk of the governor. And it was relatively recently that I got a text with a picture of the signed pardon from Tim, which was really exciting. And my dad's gotten to know him because we've spoken at events together, and we've gone and spoken at law schools together. My dad, Tim, me. So it really is a family. Yeah, I'm so grateful, so grateful.
I feel like Tim was really instrumental in getting me access to this community as well, actually, to be honest with you.
It doesn't surprise me.
Because I interviewed Tim, and then I interviewed Judge Dugan afterwards, and then Jack O'Connor, and then Judge Russell. But it was really Tim who set it all up. And without his approval, I don't think I would have gotten any further.
Well, we worked with Tim to do a volunteer veteran mentor training in Philadelphia, and he delivered, which I knew he would, and that's why we called him. And then another one that we did was in Michigan, and one of my friends who's an actor, she was on The West Wing also, and Mary McCormick, her sister, is now the Chief Justice on the State Supreme Court of Michigan. And Michigan has made a very big investment in veterans treatment courts, which has paid off. I think they still lead the nation in the number of veterans treatment courts. If they don't lead the nation, they're right up there. And that's because of everyone working on the ground in the communities. It is also because there's a real commitment on the part of the Supreme Court and other people, in Michigan. And I called her. I've gotten to work with her as well, with Justice Bridget McCormick, and that's been a joy. And when we received a grant from an organization to do to do 4 regional trainings actually, and one of them we chose to do it in Michigan, and I called Bridget, Justice McCormick, and I said, we'd like to do this here. Can you help us find a space? And can you deliver enough mentors to make it worth it? And boy, did they. We held the mentor training at the state Supreme Court. They had, I think, close to 100 volunteer veteran mentors show up, and they're wonderful. And then she got lunch donated. It was just a really inspiring couple of days. And my friend Mary has gone with her. I think she brought one or more of her children to a Veterans Treatment Court graduation in Michigan relatively recently. And I got a text saying, guess where we are? So I think once you learn about Veterans Treatment Courts, it's really hard not to be not only supportive, but to be a real cheerleader for them, because they work. And you see the benefit in people's lives. Like Tim said something at the Board of Pardons when one of them asked him, when someone asked him, why now? Why can't you do it in a couple years? Ask for this pardon in a couple of years. Why should we do this now? Why not give you a couple more years to see how things go? And which I thought was a very good question. And, Tim said something about, my middle daughter wants me to go on school trips with her when there's a parent, and they invite a parent to come and be sort of the parent on the school trip. And I can't do it. He said, I'd like to be able to do it while she still wants me to do it. And those are the little things that I think people need to think about when we think about justice reform. And when we want people to return to our communities and be productive, contributing members, we need to set them up for success. And we need to turn to evidence-based programs that have been proven to work, and treatment courts have been.
What do you think leads to such high success rates among veteran treatment courts?
Well, there are high success rates in treatment courts writ large, yes. So I think they are unheard of numbers in criminal justice. So treatment courts work. And I think that treatment courts are the most studied criminal justice model in the history of our country. So there's mountains of evidence to show that treatment courts work. I know that many of the veterans across the country have said what Chuck said to me, which was, in this courtroom, I got my unit back. And I'm not just fighting for myself. I have my brothers and sisters again. And so much of transition is hard. You go from having a unit, from having a mission, having a purpose, to not. And back in the courtroom, with an all-veteran docket, you are there with your brothers and sisters.
On the mission.
And it's not just about you. And I think that's the other lesson learned for me, is just how much of everything is about serving other people. I mean, there is really nothing in my life that I've done that's been worth anything that I've done alone. Well, so now I am director of the Advancing Justice Initiative, which is a new initiative that was, that we just launched recently. And the idea behind Advancing Justice is that I will continue to promote and keep in the public eye veterans treatment courts, but now also treatment courts across the board. So we have drug courts, family drug courts, veterans treatment courts, DUI courts, and family drug courts. So we're promoting, that's my new role is that, but also Advancing Justice is to tackle larger criminal justice reform issues and apply the principles of treatment courts to other issues in the criminal justice system, treating people as an individual, seeing their hope, seeing their humanity, providing them with what they need to be successful, non-adversarial. There are just so many lessons from treatment courts that can be applied across the board. And we're seeing that happen. And I think if I had a sort of vision for the future, what I hope it would be is that everyone who enters the justice system, certainly public safety, there are people that need to be behind bars for public safety. That, I'm not talking about that. That shouldn't change. But most of the people that are currently behind bars are dealing with a substance use disorder and or a mental health condition. And many of them, with the proper support and treatment and wraparound services, can return to our communities as civic assets. And if I had a vision and a dream, it would be that the principles of treatment courts are applied to all different populations, and that people do get treatment and do return to our communities, and that the United States is no longer number one in mass incarceration.
I think those are admirable and virtuous goals, and I wish you all the best in them.
Thank you.
I look forward to reading more about the work that you're continuing to do.
I have a couple other stories, actually. There's one other story. Certainly having the opportunity to work with so many veterans on behalf of veterans has been a gift. And as I said earlier, I've learned so much about selfless service through watching them and working with them. And I had the opportunity to work with General Barry McCaffrey, who I'm sure, other people have told you about. He's really he was so supportive and so knowledgeable, and I'm sure when I started, he probably wasn't excited too about an actress from Hollywood taking over Justice for Vets. And we sat down early on and had a meeting before I even started officially. I think, or maybe I just started. I don't know. But we sat down very early on, and he had done his homework on me. He had seen the other work that I'd done in doing a mentoring theater program, taking that program to Uganda and working with former abducted child soldiers and halfway home, and he helped me to see ways that I could build upon my experiences and to bring those skills to bear in this situation for Justice for Vets.
Specifically related to like your ability to network with people
and
social
I think
circles?
Not so much that, I don't think. I think it was more about my understanding of because I worked in a war zone in northern Uganda with former abducted child soldiers, and I really got to see the impact that had on that community. It was devastating. At the time, I think it was close to 80% of northern Uganda was living in an internally displaced persons camp. So they were completely devastated by war there. And keeping that in mind, coming back here and seeing what do we need to do here, and what we have so many resources here, and we can bring those to bear on behalf of veterans. And I think media, he really encouraged me to do, because you have a limited amount of time, and he encouraged me to tell the story and get to know the veterans.
I'm curious about your experiences in Uganda working with former child soldiers. Were there, did you recognize any similarities between their experiences and the veterans involved in treatment courts? So it's a big question.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I think the desire to have, I think the desire to do everything in their power to fight for a better life for themselves and for their families, for their community, and for their country. I would say that was a through line. A lot of the children in northern Uganda, if you ask them, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? One of them said, I want to be a great man of peace. It was interesting. Gosh, I haven't thought about this in a while. The teens that we worked with in northern Uganda were many of them living in an internally displaced persons camp in just abject poverty. And many of them had holes in their clothes and didn't have enough to eat. And one of the young men there said to me, well, he asked me if I could get him a book on Gandhi. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't ask me for food. He asked me for a book on Gandhi. He said, because Gandhi was a great man of peace, and I too want to be a great man of peace. My country needs peace. And I feel like I see that in that same desire to make the world around you better, and that's your obligation. And it's not asking for someone else to do it. It's asking for the skills and the tools to do it yourself. And I think that's what veterans treatment courts do. The veterans themselves go through the program, and they're the ones that are fighting and doing the work. We are providing, veterans treatment courts, when I say we, are providing them with the skills and the tools and the support for them to do it. And then they go on to give so much back to the community. That would be the through line. Seeing people rebuild their lives, when I say that, I include their family. I include their children. And I think that is, when we talk about the effects of veterans treatment courts, they get intergenerational. Because when a parent comes home in recovery and is able to communicate with their family, rejoin their family, rebuild that family, and be a parent again, and be a spouse again, and be a community member and a neighbor, and have a job and do meaningful work, not only does that veteran rise, but their family rises and the community rises. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's, the ripple effect is enormous. And when you look at, children that are in foster care, that's something that when a parent returns home, that doesn't have to happen for that child. And yeah.
Ms. Fitzgerald, it was such a profound honor to meet you and talk to you, and I'm really kind of amazed by the work that you do. I wasn't completely aware of all of your advocacy work, but I knew some of it. But I'm very impressed with the passion that with which you speak with these issues.
Thank you.
Very obvious that you're dedicated to these matters.
Well, I'm very lucky to get to do this. I really am. I'm so blessed, and the people that I get to work with in this office are dedicated brilliant, passionate people. And then our field of justice professionals. I love our conference. It's very stressful on our staff, of course, on us. It's incredibly stressful. But I love our conference because of all the people working on behalf of this. You know, my dad, he retired a year and a half ago, and they come to the conference. And it was before he retired, but it was obviously that was on his mind, his retirement. He's been in criminal justice for over 50 years. And he has seen the pendulum swing from the rehabilitative model to the punitive model that didn't work and resulted in mass incarceration and many lives destroyed, back to the rehabilitative model. And I think that in his retirement, he was looking back on, legacy. And he said he sat at the end of our closing ceremony one year. He just said it was incredible to be in a room full of thousands of people who care about this, who are fighting for this. And I couldn't help but feel that maybe that was a comfort to him at the end of his career, that this work will carry on.
That seems like a really great moment to end the interview. A profound, introspective moment, perhaps. I want to thank you again for sharing part of your story with me.
Thank you.
I'm deeply grateful.
Well, I am too. I'm grateful you're doing this.
So we were talking about the opioid epidemic, and it made me think of a story of a veteran who he returned home with physical pain and was prescribed opioids, became addicted, and when he couldn't get them anymore, he turned to heroin, and his entire life fell apart. And his parents actually kicked him out of their house and said, "We love you. You can't come home." And he was living out of his car, and he forged checks, and he was arrested for forging checks, and he had the opportunity to participate in a veterans treatment court. And he said, I just decided to do it. And he said, and I just thought, I'll just do this, and as soon as I'm done, I'll go back to using. And he said, after a couple months, I started seeing my life getting better, and I started getting into recovery. And then it kept getting better and better and better, and I saw the gifts of recovery. And he said the last time that he ever used heroin was right before, when he went to the Veterans Treatment Court. And he then worked in the court. He now works on behalf of veterans. He is married. He has 2 children. I've actually stayed at their house. He's an amazing guy, and an inspiration. But you see how easy it is, and that the line is very thin, and that we're all there. And I think with the opioid crisis, more and more people have become aware of the need for things like treatment courts. And then there's another judge that I actually just saw. Gosh, was it just? Yeah, I saw this. There's a judge who's in California. She recently retired, Judge Wendy Lindley, and she's someone you could talk to too.
Yeah.
But Judge Wendy Lindley is such an incredible woman who has been fighting for these treatment courts for years, and she started the Orange County Veterans Treatment Court, and hearing her share a bit of her story and wanting to bring in the community into providing services for people in need. And I think that's one thing that we are a little disconnected from in our country, is that our criminal justice system is part of our community. Our jails and prisons are part of our community. We put them far away so we don't see them, but they are part of our community. And most people that do go to prison or jail come home to our communities. And I think that we need to have a much bigger awareness of that and our obligation to have it reflect our values. And I think treatment courts certainly reflect my values. And Judge Lindley talks a lot about justice being truly just. And when people aren't getting what they need to live successful lives, and that we are just incarcerating them for them to come out and go back, that's not just. There's a better way. It doesn't have to be that way. And she walked the walk. She showed all of us that it doesn't have to be that way.
Do you think that it takes a certain type of personality to be the judge of a veteran treatment court?
I've seen a lot of different kinds of personalities in the judges in veterans treatment courts. Yeah, I've seen a lot of different personality types.
Interesting.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of different personality types in judges in general. Because I have, my parents have a lot of friends who are judges. My dad's one, so. I do think that there is a desire to see people get better. I think people are drawn, as we were talking about earlier, people are drawn to sort of the helping professions. It was interesting, Judge Lindley said something to me about a similar thing. When she first started as my dad's law professor in his first day of law school said to him about, if you want to be a social worker and do social work, the school of social work is across the street. This is law school, you know?
Right.
And she said, Judge Lindley said that there was a judge when she first started her, collaborative treatment court. She said, he said to her, he's like, "You're a social worker. You're not a judge. You're a social worker. You're not." I think she was a district attorney at the time, but and she said years later, he I think subbed in for a week of a treatment court, not a veterans treatment court, and came back to her. She got a note saying, like, I understand exactly what you were doing. You should have her tell that story. I can connect you to her if you'd like.
I would appreciate that.
Because she, I probably don't have it exactly right, but I do think this idea that I'm not going to go into it because it's the whole social work idea, but
I've noticed that I've attended a few graduations now, just a small handful, but the judges are very compassionate and empathetic, and they talk to people in the court like they're human beings with individual lives and experiences that make them complex. and
Right.
And I think that that's a big difference. And it seems to me that for any criminal justice system to rehabilitate, it has to treat people like people.
I think that's one of the principles of treatment courts in general, is treating people as individuals, seeing in them their potential. And one of the veterans in a veterans treatment court said, and he had been in and out of the system, and he said he had never, until he walked into a veterans treatment court, he had never been called by his name, been called by a number. And he said, the judge greeted me, the judge thanked me for my service. Never had that happen in a courtroom before. He said, the judge said that he believed in me, and that he knew I could do it, and that they were going to do everything they could to make sure I was successful in this program. So, yes, I think that being empathetic, not even empathetic, I think treating people as an individual and seeing their potential and their hope and their humanity, and a belief that nobody is beyond hope, that everybody is capable of recovery. Everyone is capable of living in their community and living a life that they're proud of, and doing everything in your power as a team to make sure that they get the opportunity to do that.
That sounds like another really great moment to end on. But if you think of other things that you want to talk about later on, I can always try to do another interview with you.
Okay.
I would be
Great.
happy to do that over in person or on the phone or whatever works for you.
Great. Because there are just so many great stories. There's so many. I mean, there's another one I'm thinking of right now, which is like
At one of, I think it was the second Veterans Treatment Court conference that we had a graduate came to speak, and his mother also spoke, and she stood behind him while he spoke, and then she joined him at the podium, and she said, my grandchildren got their uncle back, their beloved uncle, and she said, my husband, before he died, got his son back. She goes, and I have my son back. And just the visual of seeing the impact that a veteran getting their life back, or anybody, any individual, civilian, veteran, any human being who gets their life back, the impact on the family is enormous. And I don't think it can be underestimated. And I think we also have to remember the impact of service on the family. Because when someone serves, their family serves too.
When history is written, what do you want to say about you?
Oh gosh. That she did her absolute best and tried her hardest to help other people.
Well, it seems like you've done a lot of helping in your life. And I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Not only for talking to me and sharing part of your story with me, but for your service to your community.
Oh, thank you.
Veterans.